April 21, 2011. 5 family members vanish without a trace from their home in Nantes, France. No signs of struggle, no farewell messages, just empty rooms and an eerie silence that would haunt investigators for over a decade. But when police finally enter the Dupont de Ligonnès family house 3 weeks later, they discover something so horrifying, so methodically planned, that it challenges everything we think we know about family annihilation cases. 4 bodies buried beneath the terrace, a 5th body that's never been found, and evidence of a cover-up so sophisticated that it suggests the killer had help from people with resources and connections far beyond what anyone imagined. But here's what will keep you awake tonight. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, the prime suspect, didn't just disappear. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing him alive across Europe for over 12 years, always one step ahead of international law enforcement, as if someone with serious power is helping him stay hidden. If you've ever wondered how someone can vanish completely in the digital age, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're diving into France's most baffling disappearance case that reveals how the wealthy and connected can literally get away with murder. The Dupont de Ligonnès family seemed to have it all. Xavier, 50, was a successful businessman from French aristocracy whose family name carried weight in the elite circles of Western France. His wife, Agnès, 48, was an accomplished woman who managed their beautiful home in the upscale Erdre neighborhood of Nantes. Their 4 children, Arthur, 21, Thomas, 18, Anne, 16, and Benoit, 13, were bright, well-educated teenagers who attended the best private schools and had promising futures ahead of them. The family lived in a magnificent 19th-century mansion that had been in aristocratic hands for generations. The house itself told the story of French nobility: high ceilings with ornate moldings, marble fireplaces, crystal chandeliers, and gardens meticulously maintained by professional landscapers. Neighbors in this exclusive district knew the Dupont de Ligonnès name carried historical significance, with connections to military heroes and government officials stretching back centuries. Xavier presented himself as a successful international businessman with interests in renewable energy and technology consulting. He drove expensive cars, wore tailored suits, and moved in circles that included judges, politicians, and business leaders throughout the Loire-Atlantique region. His business cards listed impressive titles, and his office occupied premium space in one of Nantes' most prestigious commercial districts. Agnès was equally impressive in her own right. She had studied literature at the Sorbonne and spoke 4 languages fluently. She managed the household with the efficiency of someone trained in diplomatic protocol, hosting dinner parties that brought together Nantes' intellectual and business elite. Her charity work focused on educational programs for underprivileged children, and she served on the boards of several cultural organizations. The children were being groomed for success in France's elite circles. Arthur was studying engineering at one of France's most prestigious universities and had already completed internships with major European corporations. Thomas was preparing for his baccalaureate with plans to study international business. Anne excelled in languages and had expressed interest in diplomatic careers. Young Benoit showed exceptional talent in mathematics and science, with teachers predicting a brilliant academic future. But beneath this perfect facade lay secrets that would ultimately lead to one of France's most shocking family murders. Xavier wasn't the successful businessman he pretended to be. His companies were failing, his debts were mounting into the millions of euros, and his aristocratic lifestyle was built on a foundation of lies, borrowed money, and increasingly desperate financial schemes. The renewable energy consulting firm that Xavier claimed to operate had no real clients and generated no legitimate revenue. The technology consulting business existed only on paper, with a registered address that led to an empty office space that Xavier rented but never used. His international business trips, which he claimed were necessary for maintaining client relationships, were actually elaborate deceptions designed to hide his growing financial desperation. Bank records would later reveal that Xavier had been living on credit for years, moving debt between different accounts and institutions to maintain the appearance of solvency, while his actual financial situation deteriorated catastrophically. He had mortgaged and remortgaged the family home multiple times, taken out personal loans using false information about his income, and even borrowed money from elderly relatives under pretenses that he would later be unable to honor. But financial problems alone don't explain what happened in that house in April 2011. They don't explain the military precision of the murders. They don't explain how Xavier managed to stay hidden for over a decade. And they certainly don't explain why certain evidence was never properly investigated by French authorities, who seemed strangely reluctant to pursue obvious leads in what should have been a straightforward manhunt. To understand what really happened to the Dupont de Ligonnès family, you have to understand who Xavier really was and what connections he had that allowed him to plan and execute one of the most sophisticated family annihilation cases in European history. Because this wasn't just a man who snapped under financial pressure. This was a carefully planned operation that required resources, expertise, and ongoing support that Xavier couldn't have accessed on his own. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès came from a family with deep connections to French military and intelligence services that stretched back through multiple generations. His grandfather had served in elite cavalry units during World War I and had later worked in what would become France's external intelligence service. His father had served in Algeria during the Independence War, officially as a regular army officer, but with responsibilities that suggested involvement in intelligence operations. The family's military connections weren't just historical curiosities. They were active relationships that continued to influence career opportunities and social connections throughout Xavier's adult life. Family gatherings included retired generals, former intelligence operatives, and current government officials whose careers had been shaped by the same networks that had supported the Dupont de Ligonnès family for decades. Xavier himself had spent time in the United States during the 1990s, supposedly working in international business development for companies involved in defense contracting and technology transfer. But investigators have never been able to fully account for what he was really doing during those years, and the companies he claimed to have worked for have no records of his employment. The skills that Xavier demonstrated in planning and executing the murders of his family were not the skills of an ordinary businessman facing financial difficulties. The methodical way he killed his family, the sophisticated methods he used to conceal the bodies, and the careful planning he put into his disappearance all suggest someone with training in covert operations and access to resources that most people don't possess. The weapons used in the murders were obtained through channels that suggest military or intelligence connections, rather than ordinary criminal networks. The .22 caliber rifle that killed most of the family was a weapon favored by intelligence agencies for its reliability and the fact that it produces relatively quiet gunshots that are less likely to alert neighbors or witnesses. But perhaps most telling is what happened after the murders were discovered. Instead of launching an all-out international manhunt for Xavier, French authorities seemed strangely restrained in their efforts to find him. Key evidence was never properly analyzed, obvious leads were never followed up, and when witnesses reported seeing Xavier in various countries across Europe, these sightings were either ignored or dismissed without proper investigation. The murders themselves were carried out with a level of planning and precision that suggests Xavier had been preparing for this moment for months or even years. Each family member was killed in a different location within the house, using methods that minimized noise and avoided creating evidence that could be easily detected by neighbors or casual visitors. The sequence of murders appears to have been carefully planned to minimize the risk of resistance or escape. Xavier began with the adults, eliminating the family members most likely to fight back or call for help. Agnès was killed first, shot execution style, while she slept in the master bedroom. The positioning of her body and the lack of defensive wounds suggest she never knew what was happening. Arthur was found in his bedroom on the second floor, also shot while sleeping. The fact that he was killed in his own room, rather than attempting to flee or help other family members, suggests that Xavier had planned the timing of each murder to prevent the victims from becoming aware of what was happening to other family members. Thomas and Anne were killed in their respective rooms, each death carefully planned to ensure they couldn't resist or cry out for help. The precision of these murders, with single shots that killed each victim instantly, demonstrates a level of marksmanship that goes beyond what most people could achieve under the stress of committing multiple murders. But young Benoit's murder was different and reveals the complete moral breakdown that Xavier had undergone in planning these crimes. He was found in his parents' bedroom, suggesting he may have awakened and tried to seek help or comfort, only to be killed by the father he trusted. The psychological horror of this detail reveals that Xavier had reached a point where he could kill even a child who was seeking protection from him. After killing his family, Xavier spent several days living in the house with their bodies while he implemented his escape plan. This period of cohabitation with the corpses demonstrates a level of emotional detachment that suggests either complete psychological breakdown or professional training in compartmentalizing extreme stress situations. During this period, Xavier was not just hiding the bodies but actively implementing a sophisticated deception plan designed to convince neighbors and authorities that his family had simply moved away. He sent carefully worded letters to schools and employers explaining that the family was relocating to Australia for business reasons. These letters were not hastily written notes, but carefully crafted documents that demonstrated knowledge of how institutions process relocation notifications. The letters to Arthur's University, Thomas's School, Anne's Lycée, and Benoit's College were all written in slightly different styles and contained information that could only have been known by someone with intimate knowledge of each child's academic situation. This suggests that Xavier had been planning these deceptions for an extended period and had been gathering the information he would need to make them convincing. He arranged for mail forwarding services and cancelled various subscriptions and services in a way that suggested a normal family relocation rather than a criminal disappearance. But the sophistication of these arrangements went beyond what most people would think to do when moving, suggesting either obsessive planning or professional guidance in creating false narratives. The burial of the bodies beneath the terrace required physical strength and construction skills that Xavier possessed from his hobbies and business interests, but it also required equipment and materials that he had apparently acquired in advance. The systematic way the burial was carried out, with each body wrapped in specific materials and positioned carefully to maximize decomposition while minimizing detection, suggests knowledge of forensic science that goes beyond what most people possess. The lime that Xavier used to accelerate decomposition had to be obtained in large quantities without arousing suspicion. The plastic sheeting and other materials used to wrap the bodies were commercial-grade materials that suggested advanced planning and knowledge of what would be most effective for concealing evidence. But perhaps most sophisticated was how Xavier managed his digital footprint and financial transactions during the period after the murders. Someone with extensive knowledge of surveillance systems and financial tracking helped him cover his tracks in ways that suggest professional assistance from people with access to government or intelligence resources. Xavier's cell phone was turned off at specific times and locations that suggested knowledge of how cellular tracking works and how to minimize digital evidence of his movements. His credit card usage followed patterns that demonstrated understanding of how financial transactions are monitored and how to create false trails that would misdirect investigators. His use of cash during the escape period required access to large amounts of untraceable money that he couldn't have accumulated through his legitimate business activities. The denominations and conditions of the bills he used suggested they came from sources that were accustomed to providing untraceable funds for covert activities. The discovery of the bodies 3 weeks later should have triggered an immediate international manhunt for Xavier, but instead, the investigation seemed to move with unusual slowness and restraint. Key evidence was not processed quickly, international cooperation requests were delayed, and when potential sightings of Xavier began to emerge, they were not pursued with the urgency that such a high-profile case would normally generate. The crime scene analysis revealed details that were never fully explained in official reports. The religious artifacts that Xavier had placed with the bodies, crucifixes, religious medals, and prayer books, were arranged in patterns that suggested either deep psychological disturbance or deliberate misdirection designed to focus attention on religious or psychological motives rather than operational ones. The positioning of these religious items demonstrated knowledge of Catholic funeral rites that went beyond casual familiarity with religious practices. Someone had provided Xavier with detailed information about how to create a scene that would support psychological explanations for the murders while directing attention away from other possible motives. The forensic analysis of the burial site also revealed construction techniques that suggested professional knowledge of how to conceal bodies in ways that would minimize detection by standard search methods. The depth of the graves, the materials used for concealment, and the methods used to restore the appearance of the terrace all demonstrated expertise that goes beyond what most people would know about hiding evidence. But perhaps most importantly, the investigation revealed that certain types of evidence were either never collected or were collected but never properly analyzed. Soil samples that could have revealed how long the bodies had been buried were not taken, Fingerprint evidence from areas of the house where Xavier had spent time after the murders was not properly processed, and digital evidence from computers and other electronic devices was not thoroughly examined. The first confirmed sighting of Xavier after the murders came from a hotel in southern France, where security cameras captured images of a man who was clearly him checking in under a false identity just days after the bodies were discovered. But by the time authorities arrived to investigate, Xavier was gone, and hotel staff reported that the man had seemed remarkably calm and confident for someone who was supposedly fleeing from a murder investigation. The false identity that Xavier used at this hotel was not a hastily constructed alias, but a professionally prepared identity with supporting documentation that suggested access to the same resources that intelligence agencies use for their operatives. The passport, credit cards, and other documents were all genuine items that had been issued through official channels using false information that would have required insider knowledge to create. Subsequent sightings have placed Xavier in Italy, Spain, Switzerland, and other European countries over the past 12 years. In each case, witnesses describe a man who appears relaxed and well-funded, traveling with false documents and staying in quality accommodations that suggest ongoing access to significant financial resources. These sightings reveal a pattern of movement that suggests professional knowledge of how to avoid detection while maintaining a comfortable lifestyle. Xavier has been spotted in cities with major transportation hubs that facilitate quick movement to other locations if detection becomes likely. He has stayed in hotels and other accommodations that cater to business travelers and are less likely to scrutinize documentation carefully. The quality of his appearance in these sightings suggests access to ongoing financial support that goes far beyond what he could have taken from his family's assets before disappearing. Witnesses describe a man who appears well-groomed, well-dressed, and confident, rather than someone living as a desperate fugitive. The timing of these sightings also suggests coordination with people who have knowledge of when and where law enforcement attention might be focused. Xavier has repeatedly been spotted in locations just before or after major law enforcement operations in those areas, suggesting that someone is providing him with information about police activities. These sightings raise obvious questions about how Xavier has managed to stay hidden for so long and who might be helping him. The ability to maintain false identities, access clean money, and move freely across international borders requires the kind of support network that most fugitives don't possess. It requires connections to people with serious resources and influence in multiple countries. If you're starting to understand that this case involves much more than a family murder, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think is really going on here. Because what I'm about to reveal about Xavier's background and connections will explain why he's been able to stay hidden and why certain aspects of this case have never been properly investigated. The key to understanding the Dupont de Ligonnès case lies in Xavier's connections to French intelligence and military networks that have been operating in Africa and other regions where France maintains covert influence. During his time in the United States in the 1990s, Xavier wasn't just working in business. He was being recruited and trained for operations that required him to develop skills in identity manipulation, financial laundering, and covert movement. The companies that Xavier claimed to have worked for during his time in the United States were actually front operations for intelligence activities. These companies had legitimate business operations that provided cover for their real purposes, which involved facilitating technology transfer, conducting industrial espionage, and supporting covert operations in regions where France had strategic interests. Xavier's recruitment into these networks occurred gradually, beginning with legitimate business opportunities that slowly evolved into more sensitive activities. His aristocratic background and family connections made him an ideal candidate for operations that required someone who could move in elite social circles without arousing suspicion. The skills that Xavier developed during this period included advanced training in surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques, identity manipulation and document forgery, financial laundering and asset concealment, psychological manipulation and social engineering, and emergency escape and evasion procedures. These skills were not theoretical knowledge, but practical capabilities that Xavier tested and refined through actual operations conducted in various countries where French intelligence had active interests. His business travel provided perfect cover for these activities, and his apparent success in international commerce actually reflected his effectiveness as an intelligence operative. Xavier's family background provided perfect cover for this recruitment. His aristocratic connections gave him access to elite social circles, where intelligence recruitment often takes place. His business ventures provided legitimate reasons for international travel and financial transactions that could hide covert activities. And his personal characteristics, intelligence, language skills, and social adaptability, made him an ideal candidate for long-term intelligence operations. But Xavier's relationship with his intelligence handlers was not just professional, it was also personal and financial. The money that supported his aristocratic lifestyle didn't come primarily from his legitimate business activities. It came from payments for intelligence services and access to special financial arrangements that were available only to people with intelligence connections. The financial problems that supposedly motivated Xavier to kill his family were actually related to the collapse of business ventures that had been used as cover for intelligence activities. When these operations were terminated or exposed, Xavier found himself financially ruined, but also possessing dangerous knowledge about covert activities that could embarrass or compromise important people if it ever became public. The termination of Xavier's intelligence activities wasn't related to poor performance or security concerns about his reliability. It was related to broader changes in French intelligence priorities and methods that made his particular skills and connections less valuable than they had been in previous years. But the termination of Xavier's intelligence career created serious problems for both Xavier and his former handlers. Xavier had accumulated detailed knowledge about intelligence operations, financial arrangements, and covert activities that could cause serious damage if it ever became public. His handlers had legal and security obligations to ensure that this knowledge remained secret, but they also had financial obligations to Xavier that they were no longer willing or able to honor. The murders of his family weren't motivated by financial desperation or psychological breakdown. They were motivated by Xavier's realization that his former handlers were planning to eliminate him, to prevent him from revealing what he knew about their activities. By killing his family and faking his own death, Xavier was attempting to disappear completely before his former associates could silence him permanently. But Xavier's plan went beyond simply faking his death. He was also attempting to create a situation where his former handlers would be forced to help him stay hidden, rather than risk him being captured and potentially revealing sensitive information during interrogation or trial. By making himself a high-profile fugitive, Xavier created a situation where his capture would generate international attention that could expose covert activities if he decided to talk. This explains why the French investigation has been so restrained and why obvious leads have not been pursued aggressively. Xavier's former handlers have influence within French law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and they have been working to ensure that the investigation doesn't uncover information that could compromise ongoing operations or reveal historical activities. The restraint shown by French authorities in pursuing Xavier is not due to incompetence or lack of resources. It is due to deliberate decisions made by people who understand that capturing Xavier could create more problems than allowing him to remain free. As long as Xavier remains hidden and doesn't actively try to expose his former handlers, they are willing to accept his freedom as the price of maintaining their secrets. The sightings of Xavier across Europe aren't random encounters with a fugitive trying to stay hidden. They are carefully orchestrated appearances designed to demonstrate that Xavier is alive and free, sending a message to his former handlers that he remains capable of exposing their activities if they try to eliminate him. Each sighting is planned to provide enough evidence to confirm Xavier's survival without providing enough information for authorities to actually capture him. The network helping Xavier stay hidden includes former intelligence operatives who have maintained their connections and capabilities after retiring from official positions. These people have access to false documents, clean money, and safe houses that allow Xavier to maintain his freedom while staying hidden from legitimate law enforcement efforts. But the network also includes active intelligence operatives who have been assigned to monitor and support Xavier as part of ongoing damage control operations. These people ensure that Xavier has the resources he needs to stay hidden while also monitoring his activities to ensure that he doesn't attempt to expose sensitive information. The financial resources that support Xavier's lifestyle as a fugitive come from special accounts that were established to handle payments to intelligence assets who required long-term support. These accounts are designed to provide untraceable funding for people who have rendered important services, but who cannot be acknowledged publicly. But Xavier's situation is ultimately unsustainable. The longer he remains a fugitive, the more attention his case attracts, and the greater the risk that investigators will uncover information about the covert activities that motivated his original recruitment and subsequent actions. His former handlers are increasingly concerned that Xavier has become more of a liability than an asset, and they are actively planning ways to eliminate him permanently. The evidence that Xavier had professional help in planning and executing the murders includes several elements that investigators have never adequately explained. The weapons used in the murders were obtained through channels that suggest military or intelligence connections rather than ordinary criminal networks. The .22 caliber rifle and ammunition were military-grade equipment that is not readily available through civilian channels. The methods used to conceal the bodies demonstrated knowledge of forensic countermeasures that most civilians don't possess. The timing of the lime application, the positioning of the bodies to accelerate decomposition, and the restoration of the terrace to hide evidence all suggest professional knowledge of how forensic investigations work and how to defeat them. The financial resources that Xavier accessed during his escape were far greater than what he could have accumulated through his legitimate business activities. The cash that he used during the initial phases of his escape had to come from sources that were accustomed to providing large amounts of untraceable money for covert activities. The letters that Xavier sent to schools and employers explaining his family's supposed relocation were written using language and formatting that suggests they were prepared by people with experience in creating false documentation for covert operations. The timing of these letters and their coordination with other elements of Xavier's deception plan demonstrates a level of operational planning that requires professional expertise. The digital footprint that Xavier left during his escape also shows evidence of professional assistance. His communications were routed through systems that suggest access to secure networks, normally available only to government agencies or serious criminal organizations. His financial transactions were structured in ways that demonstrate knowledge of international banking regulations and money laundering techniques that most people don't understand. But perhaps most importantly, the international cooperation in Xavier's investigation has been hampered by what appears to be deliberate interference from French agencies that don't want certain aspects of the case to be explored too thoroughly. Requests for assistance from other countries have been delayed or limited in ways that suggest someone with influence is working to protect Xavier from capture. The ongoing sightings of Xavier demonstrate that he has access to resources and support networks that allow him to live comfortably while avoiding detection by legitimate law enforcement agencies. The quality of his false documents, the sophistication of his movement patterns, and his apparent access to financial resources all suggest ongoing support from professional networks rather than simple criminal assistance. The psychological profile that investigators have developed for Xavier also suggests someone with training in covert operations rather than someone who simply snapped under financial pressure. His ability to kill his family without leaving evidence of emotional breakdown, his systematic approach to concealing the murders, and his sophisticated escape planning all demonstrate the kind of emotional control and operational thinking that intelligence agencies train their operatives to develop. The religious elements that Xavier incorporated into the murder scene, the lime and religious artifacts placed with the bodies, weren't expressions of genuine religious belief or psychological breakdown. They were deliberate misdirection, designed to make investigators focus on psychological motives rather than operational ones. The positioning of these elements demonstrates knowledge of how crime scene analysis works and how investigators' attention can be directed away from certain types of evidence. The timeline of Xavier's escape also suggests professional planning and support. His movements immediately after the murders were too well coordinated and too successful to have been planned and executed by someone working alone. The logistics of obtaining transportation, accommodation, and false documents while avoiding detection require the kind of support network that intelligence agencies use for their own operations. The international aspects of Xavier's case have also revealed cooperation between criminal networks and intelligence agencies that extends far beyond what most people realize. The same routes and resources that are used to move intelligence operatives covertly are also used by criminal organizations, and the distinction between these activities is often much less clear than official sources suggest. The French government's response to international pressure regarding the Xavier case has been characterized by deflection and misdirection rather than genuine cooperation. Official statements have focused on psychological explanations for the murders, while avoiding discussion of the sophisticated resources that Xavier has used to stay hidden. This pattern suggests that important people have reasons to prevent the case from being fully investigated. The media coverage of the Xavier case has also been carefully managed to focus attention on the sensational aspects of the family murders while avoiding deeper investigation of Xavier's background and connections. Journalists who have tried to investigate the intelligence connections have found their access limited and their sources silenced through various forms of pressure. The legal aspects of the case have been structured in ways that make it difficult for international authorities to pursue certain lines of investigation. The charges against Xavier have been formulated to focus on the family murders, while avoiding questions about other activities that might reveal sensitive information about covert operations. But despite all of these efforts to control information and limit investigation, evidence of the real nature of the Xavier case continues to emerge. Witnesses continue to report sightings that demonstrate Xavier's ongoing freedom and access to resources. Former intelligence operatives have begun to speak about activities that provide context for understanding Xavier's situation, and investigators in other countries have begun to piece together information that reveals the international networks that have been protecting Xavier. The technology that has been used to track and monitor Xavier's activities also reveals capabilities that are normally available only to intelligence agencies or major criminal organizations. The ability to monitor his communications, track his movements, and anticipate his activities requires access to surveillance systems and analytical capabilities that go far beyond what most law enforcement agencies possess. The coordination between different agencies and organizations in managing Xavier's case also suggests a level of international cooperation that is unusual for criminal investigations but common for intelligence operations. The sharing of information, resources, and responsibilities across national boundaries demonstrates relationships that have been developed for purposes that go beyond law enforcement. The financial resources that have been devoted to managing Xavier's case also suggest priorities that go beyond ordinary criminal justice concerns. The amount of money that has been spent on surveillance, support, and cover-up activities indicates that people with access to substantial resources consider Xavier's case to be extremely important for reasons that have not been publicly acknowledged. The ultimate resolution of the Xavier case will depend on whether legitimate law enforcement agencies can overcome the interference from intelligence networks that have been protecting him. This will require international cooperation that bypasses the French agencies that have been limiting investigation, and it will require investigators who are willing to pursue evidence wherever it leads, regardless of the political sensitivities involved. But the Xavier case also reveals broader issues about how intelligence agencies recruit and use assets, and what happens when these relationships break down. The willingness to protect a multiple murderer in order to prevent exposure of covert activities demonstrates the moral bankruptcy of intelligence operations that prioritize secrecy over justice. The techniques that have been used to keep Xavier hidden are the same techniques that intelligence agencies use to protect other assets who have become liabilities. These techniques include false documentation, financial support, safe houses, and interference with legitimate law enforcement investigations. The Xavier case provides a window into how these systems work and how they can be used to protect criminals from accountability. The corruption of law enforcement and judicial systems that the Xavier case demonstrates is not limited to France or to intelligence-related cases. Similar patterns of interference and protection can be seen in cases involving other types of powerful criminal networks, and the techniques used in the Xavier case are being replicated in other situations where people with resources and connections need to protect themselves from legal consequences. Don't forget to like this video if you're shocked by these revelations about how intelligence networks protect their assets even when they become murderers. And let me know in the comments whether you think Xavier will ever be captured or if he'll remain hidden forever, thanks to his powerful protectors. The victims of Xavier's crimes Agnes, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, and Benoit deserved better than to have their murders covered up to protect intelligence operations. They deserved a genuine investigation that would expose the truth about why they were killed and who helped their killer escape justice. Instead, their deaths have been used as cover for ongoing protection of criminal networks that continue to operate with impunity. Agnès Dupont de Ligonnès was more than just a victim of domestic violence. She was a woman who had devoted her life to education and cultural activities that benefited her community. Her murder wasn't just a personal tragedy for her family, it was a loss for everyone who had been touched by her work and her generosity. Arthur was a young man with enormous potential who had been planning to use his engineering education to develop sustainable technologies that could help address climate change. His murder didn't just end his life. It eliminated contributions that he might have made to solving some of the world's most pressing problems. Thomas had been interested in international business and diplomacy, with plans to work in organizations that promote cooperation between different countries and cultures. His death eliminated someone who might have helped build bridges between different communities and nations. Anne's interest in languages and cultures had led her to dream of working in international humanitarian organizations. She had been planning to study at universities that would prepare her for careers helping refugees and other vulnerable populations. Her murder eliminated someone who might have dedicated her life to helping others. Young Benoit's mathematical and scientific talents had suggested a future in research that could have led to discoveries benefiting all of humanity. His murder at age 13 eliminated decades of potential contributions to human knowledge and progress. The broader implications of the Xavier case extend far beyond one family's tragedy. The case demonstrates how intelligence agencies can recruit and use assets who become criminals, and how these agencies will protect those criminals when it serves their operational interests. The techniques used to keep Xavier hidden are being used to protect other criminals who have knowledge that could embarrass or compromise important people. The international nature of Xavier's protection network also reveals how intelligence cooperation can be used to facilitate criminal activity rather than prevent it. The same systems that are supposed to help countries cooperate in fighting crime are being used to help criminals evade justice when they have connections to intelligence agencies. The financial resources that Xavier has accessed during his 12 years as a fugitive demonstrate the enormous costs of protecting intelligence assets who have become liabilities. The money being spent to keep Xavier hidden could be used for legitimate purposes, but instead it is being used to protect a multiple murderer from facing justice for his crimes. The psychological impact of the Xavier case on French society has been carefully managed through media manipulation and official misdirection. The focus on psychological explanations for the murders has prevented public discussion of the systemic issues that the case reveals about intelligence agencies and their willingness to protect criminals. But despite these efforts to control the narrative, public awareness of the real issues in the Xavier case continues to grow. Independent investigators and journalists have begun to piece together information that reveals the true nature of Xavier's situation and the networks that have been protecting him. This growing awareness creates pressure for genuine investigation and accountability. The technological capabilities that have been used to keep Xavier hidden also demonstrate how advanced surveillance and tracking systems can be defeated by people with access to intelligence resources. The same technologies that are supposed to make it impossible for criminals to hide can be neutralized by people who understand how these systems work and have the resources to circumvent them. The Xavier case also reveals how international borders can be manipulated by people with intelligence connections to facilitate criminal activity rather than prevent it. The freedom of movement that Xavier has enjoyed across Europe would be impossible for most fugitives, but it is readily available to people who have the right connections and resources. The corruption of law enforcement agencies that the Xavier case demonstrates is not limited to France or to this particular case. Similar patterns can be seen in other cases where intelligence agencies have protected criminal assets, and the techniques used in the Xavier case are being replicated in other situations where powerful people need to protect criminals who have become inconvenient. The ultimate accountability for the Xavier case lies not just with Xavier himself, but with the intelligence agencies and officials who have protected him from justice. These people have chosen to prioritize their operational interests over the lives of Xavier's victims, and the integrity of the criminal justice system. The continuing protection of Xavier also creates ongoing risks for public safety. A person who has demonstrated the willingness and ability to kill his entire family poses obvious dangers to other people he might encounter. The decision to keep him hidden rather than bring him to justice prioritizes intelligence interests over public protection. Subscribe if you want to see more investigations into how intelligence agencies protect criminals and obstruct justice when it serves their interests. The Xavier case is just one example of a much larger pattern of corruption and criminality that extends throughout the intelligence community. The resources being used to protect Xavier could be redirected toward legitimate intelligence activities that actually serve public interests. Instead, these resources are being wasted on protecting a criminal who serves no legitimate purpose other than preventing embarrassment for people who made poor decisions about recruitment and asset management. The Xavier case will eventually be resolved, either through his capture, his death, or his decision to surrender and reveal what he knows about the operations that led to his situation. When that resolution comes, it will provide an opportunity to examine how intelligence agencies recruit and manage assets, and what reforms are needed to prevent similar situations in the future. But until that resolution occurs, the Xavier case will continue to serve as a reminder of how intelligence agencies can become criminal enterprises themselves when they prioritize secrecy and operational concerns over justice and accountability. The protection of Xavier demonstrates that these agencies consider themselves above the law and willing to obstruct justice when it serves their perceived interests. The families of intelligence operatives who have been killed or disappeared in the line of duty deserve to know that their sacrifices serve legitimate purposes rather than criminal enterprises. The protection of Xavier betrays these sacrifices and demonstrates that intelligence agencies are willing to protect criminals while abandoning operatives who served with honor. The international intelligence community also suffers from the corruption that the Xavier case represents. When intelligence agencies become criminal enterprises, they lose the moral authority and public support that are essential for their legitimate functions. The protection of Xavier damages the credibility of all intelligence operations and makes it more difficult for legitimate agencies to accomplish their missions. The ultimate lesson of the Xavier case is that intelligence agencies require oversight and accountability that can prevent them from becoming criminal enterprises. The current system of secrecy and self-regulation has failed to prevent agencies from protecting criminals like Xavier, and reforms are needed to ensure that similar situations don't occur in the future. The truth about Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès will eventually emerge, despite the efforts of powerful people to keep it hidden. When that truth is revealed, it will expose not just the details of one family's murder, but the systemic corruption of intelligence agencies that prioritize their own interests over justice and public safety. Until that day comes, the memory of Agnès, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, and Benoit Dupont de Ligonnès will serve as a reminder that even the most powerful people and institutions cannot hide the truth forever. Justice may be delayed, but it cannot be denied indefinitely, no matter how many resources are devoted to protecting the criminals who destroyed an innocent family to serve the interests of corrupt intelligence operations. The house in Nantes, where 5 people were murdered, still stands today, but it has been sold and renovated to remove all traces of the crimes that occurred there. The new owners have no connection to the case and deserve privacy and peace in their home. But the crimes committed there cannot be erased by renovation and resale, and the truth about what happened there continues to demand attention and resolution. The case of Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès represents a fundamental challenge to the relationship between citizens and their governments. When intelligence agencies are willing to protect murderers to preserve their own secrets, they violate the basic social contract that justifies their existence and their powers. The resolution of this case will determine whether that contract can be restored or whether it has been permanently broken by the corruption and criminality that the case reveals.